Our story opens on a young boy named Jack having a quiet dinner with his mother. She made casserole, and it's not very good, but Jack pretends otherwise. She's a single mom, trying her best, and Jack is desperate to be as agreeable as possible. Even the very idea of someone disliking him deeply unsettles him. However, the same cannot be said for his younger brother, Clancy, who crudely asks Jack how long it takes to brush the taste of their mom's ass out of his mouth. Yo, why does little bro look like Chucky if he had a vape addiction? Anyway, the two boys grew up, and over the years their personalities crystallized into perfect opposites of each other. Jack became a straight-laced 4.0 GPA, mild-mannered nerd, and Clancy? Well, his Totino's pizza roll ass caught 3 arrests and a school expulsion, all before the age of 15. And to top it all off, after putting his poor mom through hell, Clancy told his weeping mother to eat a dick on his 18th birthday as he walked out the front door without so much as a goodbye. But Jack was still in college at this time. He's 3 years older than his brother, you see. Jack wound up getting a degree in psychology, and rumor has it, his thesis was the one that invented the term love bombing. In any case, it's been 6 years since Jack had seen Clancy, but one day he gets a Facebook message from him announcing that he's going to be in town soon and is planning to drop by. But later that same day, Jack was even more shocked to watch emergency news broadcasts about an infection turning people into hyper-violent serial killer rapists. But all that was 2 weeks ago, and now we're in the present, in a sleepy, normal-looking neighborhood. By the looks of it, you would have no idea that they're in the middle of a worldwide apocalypse. Anyway, Jack lives here, and he hands a cup of coffee to a young woman who thanks him for letting her stay in his house. Her name is Tiffany, and apparently she was wandering around the woods and stumbled upon this town. And so the two of them set out on the porch and casually waved to the passing neighbors walking by. The neighborhood has had 0 contact with the Crossed, so they're kind of just chilling. The official explanation is that the town is very remote, but whatever, man. In any event, Jack mentions that he hasn't heard anything from his mom since this all began, and when Tiffany asks if he's got anyone else, he vaguely mentions his brother. But then the scene abruptly cuts to 4 days later for some reason. Living with a girl is making Jack go crazy, and he's about ready to flop out a schmeat and change his dating status. But he gets interrupted by a loud tire squeal outside his window, and then his whole entire house shakes as a red car slams into his garage at breakneck speed. Jack bolts outside and pries open the crumpled car door, only to be shocked by the face smirking back at him. It's Clancy, with a dead cross girl in the passenger seat. Jack is like, what the fuck? And Clancy pulls out a massive blade and threatens to stab him if he doesn't do what he says. And so he forces our protagonist to haul a bunch of chains and locks out of the back of his trunk, and he next orders Jack to clear out a room for him. Clancy steps inside, and finally discloses his true intentions. The younger brother confesses that he's a perennial fuck-up, who's wasted his life drinking and injecting. But Jack's always been the one who had potential. And so Clancy announces that he wants to do one thing right in his life, and help his brother find a way out of the apocalypse. He orders Jack to chain him up, because he's about to be the psychologist's first patient. The plan is for Jack to learn what goes on in the mind of the Crossed, and to see if he can find anything that can help humanity survive. Jack asks Clancy what the hell he's talking about, and he points out that his brother is clearly not infected. But Clancy chuckles and reveals that he carefully carved a piece off of that dead cross girl in the car earlier. Jack begs his brother to stop, but Clancy ignores him and gobbles up the girl's ear with a mischievous grin. Clancy's face instantly begins to contort as the infamous rash burns into his skull, leaving Jack no choice but to slam the door shut and work on tightly locking it down with the metal chains as quickly as possible. Jack immediately brings Tiffany in on all of this, and she's surprisingly cool about the whole thing for some reason. Jack's pretty disturbed, though. There hasn't been a single sound from behind the door since he's locked it, and not only is silence unheard of from the Crossed, it's also unprecedented in regard to his notoriously vulgar brother. So, the two decide to go outside and come back later. They casually stroll around the neighborhood, chatting, and the endorphin rush reminds Jack how good it feels to be around a woman. He's also quite fascinated with Tiffany's warm and soothing nature, despite the fact that she had personally witnessed her entire family being slaughtered in front of her just a mere few weeks ago. Anyway, they return back home, and Jack tells the woman to go ahead and sleep, and he'll keep watch over Clancy's door. Tiffany calls him a sweetheart and pecks him on the cheek. Jack's heart swells with satisfaction, and he goes back to trying to communicate with his brother. It goes nowhere at first, and he pounds the door, frustrated at the lack of response. But then, out of the depths, a coarse laugh grows, and a heavy weight presses against the other side of the door. It's the Crossed Clancy, and he growls that they're finally alone. Jack, startled, asks if that means he was waiting for Tiffany to leave, but that question is left unanswered. Instead, Clancy spouts out a bunch of vile shit, way too appalling for me to repeat. After talking at length about how he's going to violate his brother, Clancy suddenly stops, and bluntly tells Jack that he wants to kill him. Jack is completely flabbergasted, and he shakily wipes the sweat off his brow. But then a thought comes over him, and he puts on a determined face and drags a chair in front of the locked door. He adjusts his glasses and methodically pulls out a pen and paper, and he asks Clancy how long he's felt this way. Right, so that brings us now to the second issue, which opens with Clancy throwing up in a flashback from like a week ago. He's drinking the day away with a random biker guy at an abandoned bar. The guy apologizes to Clancy for being too drunk to listen to what the redhead was talking about, and Clancy scratches his head and remembers he was talking about his older brother, and that ends the flashback. We pick back up with the therapy session, which is pretty much as unproductive as you would think. Jack asks Clancy how he's feeling, and the ruffian swiftly responds that he's feeling hard. The psychologist brushes this off, and inquires if he's perhaps feeling nauseous, but Clancy just starts ranting about how he wants to rape and eat him. Jack points out that doing all those horrible things won't actually alleviate the underlying drive, and he's in turn told to go fuck himself. So our protagonist tries one last time to get a serious answer out of his subject by asking if he feels any pain in his condition. But Clancy only responds by rambling about how whacking his meat raw feels good, and then he starts pissing everywhere. So Jack calls it quits and goes to the bathroom to wash his exhausted face. Obviously, this shit's turning out to be a worse experiment than the French Revolution's HR department, but nevertheless, Jack contents himself by trying to intellectualize the matter. He figures that the cross virus unleashes the dark unconscious, and so, in a deep, twisted way, whatever reaction or insult the monster throws at him, it must be grounded in who his brother once was. At least in some faint capacity. The material's gotta be coming from somewhere, in other words. Whatever the case, Jack exits and finds Tiffany hovering next to the locked door with her arms crossed. Jack immediately, profusely apologizes for whatever heinous shit Clancy just said to her, but she responds that actually, he hasn't made a single sound. Jack is dumbfounded, and he starts pounding on the door, and we see Clancy standing silently on the inside, gouging out his eye with his thumb. They don't know about that on the outside, though, and Tiffany pipes up that maybe Jack's therapy is helping him. Jack looks at her, then at the door, and is like, nah. But Tiff is serious. She shares that the only way she's been able to cope with her family's murders is with the hope that the crossed can evolve. She specifies that, after all, humans once were uncivilized, primitive monkey savages, and we grew out of that, so why not the crossed? But Jack shakes his head and clasps her hand like a child, lecturing her that no, there's no hope. Wow, this guy's kind of a Redditor. We next get a one-page sequence of that biker guy from earlier stumbling around the woods naked. Crossed, of course. Yeah, this scene doesn't really make sense where it is, and it's definitely something I would have rearranged if I wasn't trying to showcase the story without my usual editorial interference. Anyway, so Jack sits out on the porch as the sun rises, sipping his joe and slipping into another flashback. Also, is it just me or is Blood totally wearing a dress right now? In any event, we're transported back to Jack's adolescence, to a formative moment when he musters up the courage to awkwardly ask the girl he's next to go to the dance with him. She quickly friend-zones him, and he's like, I know you said that before, but I think if you gave me a chance, I can totally rock your world, babe. However, this gallantry is interrupted by Clancy, who has his tongue on the window like a dog. Jack rolls it down and asks what the fuck he's doing, and the menace jams his head in the car and loudly shouts at the girl, "Yeah, I heard you let Hart Mackins eat you out a few times a week." The girl blushes and slightly giggles, and Clancy's like, "Yeah, my brother has a small toddler dick anyway, though." Naturally, Jack was pretty pissed off about all this, and he told their mom everything, and she reamed Clancy for embarrassing his brother like that. She yelled at him that there was only one man in the house, and he actually cared about people's feelings. Clancy's like, "Yo, this shit's fucking gay," and he stomped off to his room, slamming the door shut behind him. Right. So back in the present, Jack storms back upstairs with a grim look. He was the big brother after all, and doesn't he bear some responsibility for how Clancy ultimately turned out? It's uncertain, but Jack's resolved to get to the bottom of their relationship, so he gets all properly seated and quietly asks through the door if he was a good brother to Clancy as a child. He doesn't get a direct answer. Instead, the maniac gleefully laughs and mockingly asks Jack if he can guess what he's about to do with his finger. The psychologist's eyes shoot wide in alarm as Clancy pulls down his pants and begins to moan. But right then, Tiffany pops her head around the corner, and the freak goes dead silent. She asks if everything's all right, and Jack angrily slams his stuff into the floor, declaring that he's done with this bullshit. Tiffany softly requests that she be given a shot at it, but Jack's like no. But she presses on anyway, and in a sympathetic voice, she purrs to Clancy, cooing that she knows he's suffering in there, but it's okay. They're not gonna go anywhere. Jack grabs her arm, demanding that she cease this weird delusion, but Tiffany snaps at him to get his greasy paws off of her. She accuses Jack of abandoning his brother, for being a cynic, and not wanting to believe he can get better. Tiffany tells him that he needs to take a long, hard look in the mirror, and so she moodily struts off, leaving Jack speechless. He still jerked off to her later, though, but this time with a hint of anger. Clearly, the Crossed are smarter than they're given credit for, cause obviously his brother is manipulating Tiffany into turning against him. Be that as it may, we return to the woods, where the inexplicably well-groomed infected guy is still waltzing around like an idiot. But I guess his efforts paid off, cause he staggers his way right to the edge of town, and he lets out a victorious roar. Yeah, whatever, man. We return to the house, where Tiffany is seated, monologuing at Clancy's shackled door. She explains that she used to see empathy as inherently feminine, and femininity as inherently weak, and so she built a hard wall around herself. But now she realizes she was wrong. Empathy is what makes us human. Tiffany thinks back to the death of her family at the hands of the Crossed, how they tore them apart and how helplessly it made her feel. How, in an instant, all her shields and defenses immediately collapsed. And now all Tiffany wants is that empathy. She's so desperate to be seen and to be understood. And so she's actually struck by Clancy's silence. It's a little validating to her, because for once, it means someone is listening. Tiffany tells the man that she knows he's not a monster, but we're treated to a full splash page of Clancy leering with several severed fingers jammed up his ass. God damn it. I'm gonna need some therapy after this. Right, as it were, we do another flashback. This time when Jack tried to tell his brother he got into college. Clancy was totally uninterested, and he kept playing his video games without even slightly pretending to care. Jack continues on, though. He bows his head and mentions that he knows they have become distant since they were little, and he apologizes for that. And if Clancy ever needs someone to talk to, his big brother will always be one call away. But the redhead continues to play without regard, though, and Jack, slightly losing his temper, plants his hand on Clancy's shoulder, demanding to know why he won't acknowledge him. Clancy recoils and crushes Jack's hand with a look of pure hatred. He coldly tells Jack never to come into his room without asking. The two brothers silently look at each other, and Jack slumps his shoulders and leaves. Anyway, in the present, we catch up with that naked Cross guy, who's fucking around like a degenerate on a large baseball field that this minuscule town in the middle of nowhere has for some reason. And huddled together, watching all this from a distance, is Jack, Tiffany, and their worried neighbor. The guy is freaking the fuck out cause their community's been breached, and there's probably more of them close behind. But Jack pushes up his glasses, and replies that that's unlikely, because they would have heard them by now. He thinks it's just one lone Cross guy. So he tells his neighbor that, quote, "There's only one sensible thing to do in this situation," which apparently means completely ignoring the infected guy and locking themselves up in their homes and boarding up all the windows and exits. Hopefully there's not a house fire, I guess. Jack decides to pop open a bottle of tequila to take the edge off. He doesn't really drink, but he's had it for a while and what the hell. So he starts slurping that shit down, and he stumbles to his therapy chair to begin another session. He asks Clancy what his dreams are like, and the brute responds by talking about how he wants to skull fuck Jack. Not like fuck his skull, but fuck him with a skull. Charming. Jack scoffs and begins to mock his brother, taunting him that he'll never be able to do any of that. He asserts that Clancy is powerless. He's just a useless piece of shit who spouts perverted nonsense for attention. And the worst part of it all? Clancy was like this before he became infected. But Clancy is unperturbed by this outburst. He just laughs and starts peeing again. So Jack crashes out again and starts hurling shit around in a rage. And the alcohol must have really gone to his head, because he gets the bright idea to break out of his own home and aimlessly wander around the darkened streets. He winds up tripping over a dead body and knocking himself out on a dumpster. What a hero. Jack wakes up a few hours later. It's still dark, but the bright moon illuminates the town, and it's pretty clear everything's gone to shit. He spots his neighbor running past the alleyway, wheezing. I don't know what happened to his shirt, but he kind of looks like that one alligator meme. Anyway, he's running for his life from a pack of cross ghouls, but unfortunately, they catch him. And if you know anything about the crossed, you know they show no mercy. They eat the man alive and simultaneously carve through him with a thick blade. The screams are visceral and gut-wrenching. Jack covers his mouth in unbearable horror, and he quietly backs away into the shadows. He creeps back home and carefully slides back inside. While he acknowledges that what just happened to his neighbor was a terrible act of savagery, he can't help where his mind immediately goes next. You see, he can't stop thinking about how this all means he gets to be a knight in shining armor and save Tiffany. He admits to himself that, yes, he's completely inexperienced with women, but if there's one thing he knows that turns them on, it's a goddamn hero. So he puffs out his chest and charges up the stairs, ready to rescue the girl away from this place. But when he turns the corner, he walks in on Tiffany, completely naked, legs spread, flicking the bean, and moaning in front of Clancy's door. Alright, I'm done with this shit. And if that wasn't bad enough, we jump to a random montage of all the times Jack got caught masturbating in his life. By his mom behind the doghouse, at summer camp, and that time he got caught spanking the monkey to his aunt, by his aunt. You know, I didn't want to say this before, but some of this is starting to get way too specific not to be based on a true story. Anyway, Tiffany lets out a shriek and quickly pulls her pants up. Jack about tumbles over in shock, and that mood is only heightened when Clancy chimes in, laughing that she chose him over Jack. Tiffany breathlessly tries to explain that she was only doing it for scientific purposes, but that's obviously stupid, so she gives up halfway through. Jack, meanwhile, clenches his fists and seethes, and he completely breaks down, shutting out and screaming at her for trying to judge him for anything. And then, quivering with rage, he stomps his foot and yells that women are nothing but a bunch of sluts. Tiffany swiftly decks him across the face with a hard left hook, and she also spits in his face and starts to leave. Jack nebbishly apologizes, begging her to stay, but Tiff tears off the boards covering the front door. Weren't those nailed in? Anyway, she takes one look at the hellstorm outside and promptly changes her mind about leaving. Yeah, as you can see, the situation is irredeemably fucked. Jack starts crying, and Tiffany tells him to get his shit together, cause for better or worse, they're stuck together, and they need to formulate a plan. Jack wipes away the tears, and responds that he thinks he just fell in love with her. Good God. So of course we do another flashback to Jack and his mother on his graduation day. His mom beams with excitement, and she gushes about how proud she is of her son. She expresses her eagerness to have grandkids one day, but the conversation gets interrupted there. Jack gets a phone call from Clancy. Jack asks where the hell he's been and urges him to return home. He tells him that their mom is worried about him, and so is he. Clancy grunts and slowly exhales his cigarette smoke. In a bitter voice, he hisses that one day, the world is going to see Jack for the stunted moron he always was. He calls his brother an insecure loser who desperately tried to be the man of the house because he couldn't bear to release himself from his mom's tit. And the final thing Clancy says before he hangs up is that when the day arrives, when Jack's finally exposed, he'll be there, laughing. Anyway, in the present, the two geniuses put their heads together and come to the breathtaking conclusion that they can either stay here or run. If they could make it to the woods, they might be fine, but the Crossed are camping outside the front door. Jack looks down and actually proposes that he should go outside and distract them and let Tiffany get away unencumbered. He figures that she's already lost everything once and deserves a chance to make it out alive. Tiffany looks at Jack in astonishment, and she comments that if she didn't find him sexually repulsive, she would probably give him a kiss right now. And to this, Jack responds with a pathetically upbeat, "I know," signaling that he took that as a compliment. In any case, Jack tells Tiffany to wait downstairs. If they're going to go through with this plan, he needs to say goodbye to his brother. So he sits down for the last session, ready to reveal his final assessment. He concludes that Clancy made no progress in their time together, and that's not at all surprising. But he doesn't blame his brother for it. He was just acting in accordance with the base human instinct. Pure experience, and no ego and no overthinking. Jack tells Clancy that if anything gets through to him, it should be this. He's always admired his little brother. He lived free and he'll die free. Something Jack never authentically could. Jack then leans toward the door, and he awkwardly thanks Clancy for never saying anything about it to Tiffany. In the dark, Clancy bears a wide, sinister grin, and with blood streaming down his face, he whispers that he was only waiting for the right moment. And with that, Clancy begins to scream so loud his entire body shakes. He pretends to call for their mom, shrieking that Jack put his fingers in his butthole, that he keeps coming into his room at night and doing it in the dark. Clancy then mockingly wails, "Mommy, Mommy, why don't you believe me?" Jack scrambles down the stairs and, tripping over himself, desperately tries to convince Tiffany that his brother is lying. She looks at him quizzically, asking why he's making such a big deal out of the standard Cross nonsense. But then it all clicks for her. Their relationship dynamic, the severed fingers, Jack's reaction, it all makes sense now. She screeches at him to get away from her, and accuses him of taking advantage of his golden boy status to abuse his own brother, knowing that no one would believe Clancy over him. Jack starts hyperventilating, crying that he was just a kid and he didn't know what he was doing. He howls that you can never admit to something like that, and it's not his fault. Tiffany backs up to the front door, screaming at him again to get away, and Jack, punts her outside. Immediately, dozens of glowing, bloodshot eyes lock onto the girl, and as the rancid hands seize every inch of her body, Tiffany bellows out that Jack's a coward and he's gonna burn in hell. But he can't really hear her. All of his senses are in overdrive, and all he can hear is a ringing sound. He bashes his hands into his head, and finally it starts to go away. Jack almost feels calm, and he rigidly adjusts his posture and marches up the stairs. Clancy is lounging in his dark cell when the first light in days shine over his cross face. It's Jack. He's opened the door, and he sits down on the floor next to his brother. They sit side by side in silence for a few beats before Clancy giggles and turns to Jack, coarsely asking if he wants to fuck. Jack stares at him blankly for a couple of seconds, and then, in a detached voice, answers back, "Sure." And so the story ends with the two of them looking into the camera like half-wits, as if this were a fucking sitcom or some shit. And that's literally it. That's the end. Sorry, but before we go to the next arc, I have to stop and point out this panel here, because I think it's really demonstrative of the whole entire story. Do you notice how much more detailed the drawing on the left is over the right? Notice how much higher resolution it is? Do you notice how the figure on the right is so obviously copy and pasted from another scene entirely onto here? Holy fucking shit, man. God damn it, bro. You couldn't make this shit up, dog.